Once upon a time, you were just a fertilized egg, a zygote. But that zygote grew to be a baby, and then a child, and now a young adult, and eventually an adult. In order to grow, that zygote had to divide many, many times. To better understand how these cells divide, we're going to explore the cell cycle. Let's start with an overview. What is the cell cycle? Well, the cell cycle is just a series of events that occur in a particular order that involve cell growth and cell division. Now let's explore the stages that occur in the cell cycle. We're going to start with this initial cell, which is a simplified cell containing only one chromosome. This cell is going to spend most of its life in interphase. An interphase is composed of three smaller phases, G1, S, and G2. After interphase, a cell may enter mitosis phase, and then it may proceed through cytokinesis. At this point, we now have two identical cells, and these cells could enter the cell cycle and go through G1, S, G2, mitosis, and cytokinesis, resulting in two more cells. And after many, many rounds of the cell cycle, that's how you go from being a zygote to an adult with trillions and trillions of cells. Now let's explore what happens in these phases in a little bit more detail. Here's an initial cell with two chromosomes, one homologous pair. During G1, the cell is simply going to grow in size. So think of G for growth. During S phase, something very important occurred. The chromosomes duplicated thanks to the process of DNA replication. So S stands for synthesis or replication of DNA. It's important for the cell to double its chromosomes because if it's going to divide into two new cells, each of those new cells needs its own copy of the chromosomes. After S phase, the cell will enter G2. During G2, the cell grows again, and it also makes copies of its organelles and its molecules. So here you can see that there are now more mitochondria and more ribosomes, more Golgi bodies, more smooth ER, and more rough ER. And again, this will ensure that the two new cells that are resulting from the cell cycle will have their own materials to function. After G2, the cell may then enter mitosis. And during mitosis, the difference is that the nucleus with its double chromosomes has now divided into two identical nuclei. And each nucleus has a copy of the original chromosomes. Two chromosomes, one homologous pair. Mitosis will then be followed by cytokinesis, in which the cytoplasm divides. And at this point, we now have two identical daughter cells. Each has a copy of the genetic information that the original parental cell had. And they all have copies of organelles and molecules that they need to survive. So to sum up, a cell grows during G1, copies all of its DNA during S, grows a little bit more during G2, and then the nucleus divides during mitosis, and then the cytoplasm, the rest of the cell, divides during cytokinesis. Now, it's important to note that not all cells follow the cell cycle in the same way. For example, some cells don't enter the cell cycle, and they exist in a state known as G0. This is a resting or non-dividing state, and it could be temporary or it could be permanent. Cells that are in G0 are not undergoing the cell cycle. They're simply doing their thing. Now, there are some cells that will never divide. They will be in G0 their entire life. Red blood cells and neurons and muscle cells are examples of cells that don't divide. Now, occasionally, cells that are in the G0 state can be induced to divide and enter the cycle, given the appropriate signals, and we'll take a look at that in a later lesson. Now, there are some cells in your body that divide occasionally. For example, your liver cells and your pancreas cells. And then you have some cells that are dividing all the time. For example, skin cells and bone cells and white blood cells. And these are cells that are constantly dividing because they're either the basis of growth or because they have to replace old cells that are dying or are in need of repair. And that concludes our exploration of the cell cycle. Don't forget to take the poll.